Western passports are less and less valuable. That's in part because non-Western passports are actually increasing in value, with new freedom of movement coming into place, better visa-free travel, and more livable countries. But Western passports are also becoming worse as the world becomes more multipolar, and having a Western passport may limit your options. So today, I'm going to tell you why, even if you keep your current Western passport, which most people will, why you want a crappy passport, or at least one that maybe you think is crappy, as part of your so-called passport portfolio. Because you won't see it by watching the BBC or Fox News or ABC, but the world is actually becoming more multipolar. More countries are becoming neutral. And more countries are shifting away from working with the West. And that means in a time when you may want to seek options to escape the next pandemic or high taxes or whatever other chaos happens in your country, there may be fewer places that want to let you in, or there may be another passport you can use that comes with a lot less baggage and gives you most of the same benefits. Let me show you a graph that I shared with our audience at Nomad Capitalist Live. It shares where Serbian citizens can go versus where US citizens can go without getting a visa. Now, Serbia is one of the most improved passports in the world over the last 10 years or so. We've been talking about this for years, and you can see there are a few countries where Serbians would need a visa to go. Serbians who have wealth will probably get these visas, unless there's some geopolitical spat or they just don't like you. But there's also countries that only Serbians can go. And I imagine as Serbia has been very aggressive, and other countries like it has been very aggressive in adding more visa-free travel for its citizens, this list is going to narrow, and the difference between them is going to be different. Whereas Serbians who don't live in Serbia don't really have to worry much about whatever's going on in Serbia. They can escape whatever the chaos is. If they don't like the politics, they can leave. If they don't like the tax rates, they can leave. None of that follows them. It does follow Americans because taxes and regulations and all sorts of things follow you as long as you have a US passport. And we've talked about the trend that other Western countries, potentially Canada or Australia, want to do the same. They want to impose their values on you, even if you don't live in their country, merely because you hold their passport. A country like Serbia that's dramatically increased its passport's quality, but also doesn't really have the resources, the desire, the culture to chase people who don't live there. They've got a history of people leaving, and they respect that. That may be not a bad passport to have. And I'm not necessarily saying everyone should go out and get a Serbian passport. If you have Serbian ancestry, you should. If you want to go and live in Serbia, they may be making it easier in the near future to be naturalized there. But Serbia is a stand-in for so many different, what I call Tier B passport countries. A Tier B passport is one where you can't go to the United States or Canada or Australia or New Zealand, but you can go to Europe, you can go to a lot of other places, and maybe you have access to places that Westerners don't have because Serbia is a more neutral country that has one foot in Europe and one foot in the East. It works with Russia, it works with China, it works with places in that part of the world. And they get along with everybody, as they say. I think as the world becomes more multipolar, and Westerners realize their government hasn't been treating them as well, people are going to want these Tier B passports. And what you have to know about this is not about moving to another country. Many people can get citizenship by descent without going there. There's a number of Caribbean countries, as well as a number of new other countries in places like Eastern Europe and North Africa that allow citizenship by investment, where you can either donate or invest money into something like real estate or bonds and get a passport in a matter of months. There's other ways through golden visas to get passports. There's a lot of different ways to get a citizenship, even if you don't necessarily want to move. So you don't have to live in the proverbial Serbia necessarily. Some countries will require you to move there to get their passport if you don't qualify through, let's say, your ancestry, or you can't get a golden visa, or you can't go and hire a bunch of people. But I'm not talking about where to live. I live in Malaysia, for example, part of the year, and I think Kuala Lumpur is better than a number of US or other Western cities. But you are not going to get a Malaysian passport. Where you live is different than where your citizenship is. And when shockwaves come running through the world, you may not live in the country that you're a citizen of, but you'd rather have the protections of a country that's more neutral and that doesn't, bother everybody where you may want to go to protect yourself. If you're an American and you go to Switzerland, most Swiss banks are not going to open a bank account for you. There are a few. We work with one big one in particular that does take Americans, but most of them don't. And that's because your passport comes with baggage. Sure, there are a few banks around the world that don't want to take Serbians, and yet it's really pales in comparison. So we have to banish this idea that having a Western passport is some great privilege, and like almost we should look down on other people who have these lesser passports. One person said that the entire premise of our channel is delusional, that when the United States goes down, shockwaves are going to ripple around the world, and that we're going to be some gringo in a nation that probably sees upsurges and revolutions, that would be more than happy to fleece the foreigner. And the idea that capital can be divorced from the nation is absolutely insane. I don't even know what that means. And I kind of think that there's a lot of people out there who the only thing they have in their life is they're an American. If you take that away, it's like, I'm naked. What else do I have? I think that if you identify as a family man, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, an entrepreneur, an investor, someone who's on a mission, someone who innovates, like that's what your identity should be, not being an American. And I think we have to get out of this notion that you're going to feverishly defend the country that you're in and try and say that the idea of diversifying at a time of great chaos in the world is stupid. This idea that the United States is always going to be the one that catches a cold and the rest of the world sneezes, or is it the other way around? In a multipolar world is becoming less and less significant. If you go to much of Latin America, if you go to Africa, the diplomats are openly saying the US does not care about us and we want to do deals with other countries. We want to put our country first. We're no longer putting the US first. And you can say, hey, who cares about those little African countries? You can have snide remarks and say, who cares? But you're going to see some of those countries improve. Look at a country like Colombia, for example. About 7 years ago, their citizens needed a visa to go to Europe, and they got scrutinized. Then they got visa-free travel to the Schengen area in Europe. And just this year, they got visa-free travel to the United Kingdom. You may not want to go to the UK, but that's a rather elite club of countries whose citizens can go to the UK without getting a visa. And it shows that countries that people kind of look down their nose at are actually getting much better passports. And you can say, well, Colombia is unsafe. And I can show you statistics that show, yes, Colombia and most Latin American countries are less safe than Eastern European countries like a Serbia or others in that region, countries in the Gulf, countries like a Singapore, even Malaysia. Those are, yes, statistically safer countries to live in. Yet I go to Bogota and I remain generally pretty safe. You take a few more precautions there than you would somewhere else. But again, if you become a Colombian citizen, you don't have to live in Colombia. And you don't take the baggage of Colombia with you. Now, again, is there going to be some border guard who's going to look at you and say, oh, Colombia? Sure. I hear stories like that from my friends from Nicaragua, Colombia. I've heard it from Moldovans. I've heard it from people. There's almost kind of they enjoy a little bit of the victimization. And I'm sure occasionally someone asks them a question. I can tell you, I felt like as an American in the UK, a much icier reception than when I went as a St. Lucian to the UK. And so anecdotally, I think having a passport, I can tell you I've been to plenty of non-judgmental countries on pretty weak passport, the Comoros passport. And a country like Singapore, for example, just says, is your country on the list? Okay, it is. Here you go. I was flying through Germany recently. Do you need a visa to go to this country? Check the list. No? Okay, great. Off you go. Most countries aren't as judgmental as those that I'm from and perhaps the one that you're from. And so we have to get rid of this idea that someone's going to judge us if we were to get a Colombian or a Serbian or an Armenian passport through descent, or if we wanted to move to one of these countries, even if it was part-time. There are some countries in Central America where even if you spend 2, 3, 4 weeks there per year, 3 to 5 years from now, you can get citizenship. You may need to learn Spanish, but you don't have to move there full-time. Those passports in those Central American countries are pretty good. And so as some of the stuff of the sovereign individual, book written in the 90s, predicted, capital is really existing in the ether. And I think that in that kind of world, the passport you have is much less important. I'm not saying you want to go out and make your only passport an African passport. I'm certainly not saying you want to go out and become Iranian or something. I knew somebody once, they married an Iranian, they got the Iranian passport immediately. So, I'm not so sure about that. But if you already have a way to make money, if you've got a business somewhere, particularly if that business can be run from anywhere, if it runs in the cloud, if you have investments that will go anywhere, most brokerage accounts don't care whether you're American or Serbian or Colombian, particularly if you can show, hey, I was naturalized in this country, or I got this by investment. I didn't make my money in Colombia. I made my money in the US. I made my money in Canada. Again, the countries that I'm mentioning in the emerging world are stand-ins for dozens of different countries that could be possibilities to have citizenship. There will be banks and brokerages that don't want Americans. And I think, I remember some banks in Singapore after Brexit saying, we don't want British citizens. Banks in Singapore would rather have a wealthy Indonesian than have an American. Period, full stop, end of story. That's the new world. That's the multipolar world. And you can sneer at that, and Fox News can tell you otherwise, but that's, as someone who spends time in Singapore, that's the truth. They just want the money. They're a bank. They want the money. And they want the person who comes with the least baggage. The Indonesian doesn't bring baggage. Now, you're not going to get Indonesian citizenship in most cases, but it just goes to show having a Western passport is going to give you fewer options. Open a bank account in America as an American in Singapore? Yes, you can do that. The number of banks has reduced. There are some ways now you can do it, and that's what we help our clients do. But there's still fewer options. But even if you get the bank account, you can't make investments. Why? Just the SEC. And so if you're already wealthy, we need to dispel this notion that like you're going to be, let's say you get, Nicaraguan citizenship. We've talked about Nicaragua over the years, and I told you about an acquaintance of mine who's like, oh, what a terrible passport. Nicaragua has a pretty good passport. The problem is that if you don't have much money as a Nicaraguan, and obviously most Nicaraguans don't have a lot of money, it is an emerging economy, and you want to go somewhere and make more money, yeah, trying to get into the United States is tougher as a Nicaraguan. Now, there's plenty of European countries they can go to, but that's not what they were sold on for generations. The land of opportunity wasn't Ireland. It was the United States. That's branding. Believe me, there's plenty of jobs open. I heard 70,000 jobs are open in Ireland. There's Brazilians, there's Mexicans, there's Nigerians, there's Chinese people. Please, if you make this salary, if you've got a clean criminal record, we need people to work. So there's places you can go, and you don't need a visa as a Nicaraguan to go to Ireland or the UK. You go. That makes the process of getting the work permit easier. What's so bad about being Nicaraguan? It's only if you just want to go to one of those couple of countries where you need to get a visa, and they're really tough. Well, how about we remove the part where you go to a country where they treat you, they're jerks? Why don't we just remove that? Why don't, rather than like hoping that the one girl who doesn't like us will like us, if we hope really hard, why don't we talk to all the other girls out there who might be interested in us, and some of them like us? That's the perspective I want us to change. If you have a Nicaraguan passport and you've got $10 million in a brokerage account that's based in Singapore, and you can get a residence permit in Dubai because, again, as long as you've got a criminal record, and as long as you start a company or buy a piece of real estate, they don't really care where you're from. Non-judgmental countries, which are most of the countries in the world, they don't care where you're from. In fact, I will tell you from personal experience, being anything but an American, it's easier to get Malaysian MM2H, for example, the residence permit. They're not going to judge you if you bring a Nicaraguan or a Serbian passport. Again, maybe in Asia, okay, Colombia, Mexico, oh, we heard there's some gangs, but they're going to run some checks, and you're going to get your residence permit. If you need to live in the Gulf and you need to have a job to live there, then yes, having a US or a European passport is going to earn you a higher salary straight up. But we're talking to entrepreneurs and investors who have their own income. You can have your money wherever you want. I'm not saying move your money to Nicaragua, but if you could go to a country and spend some small amount of time every year, or again, you already had a claim to the passport, or maybe you want it, there's any number of ways to get these passports. What's so bad about doing that? Let's talk about what makes Western citizenship less relevant. Multipolarity. Other countries that have been blocked or sanctioned by the US or the EU over the years, they're growing their economic muscles, and they're going to have their own groups. You see that with BRICS. You see Brazil and Argentina talking. You see a lot of different side groups talking about, let's get ourselves out of this system because the US is not a reliable partner. The dollar is not a reliable currency for us. They don't like us. They put us on their naughty lists. We don't think we're naughty, right? If you're an American, your country does some naughty stuff. Do you think you're naughty? You think you should be punished by having that passport? I think in the future you'll have more of that, but multipolarity is happening. And so I think you'll see more countries doing their own thing. US, if you're an American, you have fewer crypto investment choices. You have fewer foreign mutual choices. Banks don't want you, even if they'll take you as a customer, some of them don't want you to invest, like the banks in Singapore. And as you see the way Western countries treated their citizens, like the way Australia said their own citizens in violation of what the United Nations has talked about since World War II, couldn't come back to their own country. Well, but we've got a really good excuse this time. There should be some things that are just, this is the deal. This is what you've been paying for your entire life, and they threw it out the window. Some of these emerging countries, they're like, yeah, well, we're going to leave people alone. They're not going to chase you around the world. And there are places in the world where it's just like, hey, live and let live. I live in countries, I never see the police driving around, and somehow things are safe. Just don't see it. Everything I see about the U.S. is increasingly a police state. Look at France. People are burning stuff down because they've got to work an extra hour and a half a week. That's the place I want to be from. If you need a job, sure, have a U.S. passport, live there. And yet, how many remote jobs are available that come and work for my company? We may pay you a little bit less for cost of living because we do hire people all around the world. But if you're a talented person, I'd almost you rather not be American. If you can do a job, please. If there's a Nicaraguan, go to nomadcapitalist.com/careers. We want talented people. We don't care where you're from. And so that's the way the world's going. We can help you get these passports. There's citizenship by descent. There's citizenship by investment. There is spending a little bit of time in a country, what we call paper residence. There are golden visas. There are investment visas. There's so many different things to do. If you're just going to go and search for a second passport, you're going to see a bunch of ads for companies that want to sell you a passport in a Caribbean country, pay them $100,000, get the passport in a matter of months. That may be the best option. That may be one of a couple different options that you want. But there are others. And I have one of those myself as part of my portfolio. But maybe you want to throw one in if your concern is, oh, I'm going to be the gringo. Okay, go to somewhere in Latin America. The entire continent was based on immigration. They're all open for immigration. Almost every country in Latin America is open for immigration. And we had a woman who worked for us once, lived in Mexico. She was originally from the United States, but she spoke Spanish. I mean, she was like blonde and blue-eyed. And they're like, oh, we thought you were Mexican. Like, we thought you were one of us. And you are one of us because you speak our language. So, if you can learn the language, I think a lot of those countries, people are just going to accept you. Fine, go to a country in Europe where you don't look like the gringo. There's so many things you can do to avoid that problem. But we can help you build a passport portfolio beyond just the things that 100 different people sell as shiny objects, because you have to understand what you're doing this for. What are your concerns? Is it financial? Is it personal safety? A lot of people are worried about CBDCs now. People are worried about where they're going to go for personal freedom. Who knows when the next Black Swan event happens? Different passports have different benefits. I mean, Turkey citizenship by investment in some ways. You buy a piece of property, you sell it in 3 years, you get citizenship now, in a matter of months. That offers some benefits, but it may not offer all the benefits you want. And so if you go to nomadcapitalist.com, we can show you our holistic approach where you make sure you're actually solving a problem, where you've heard all your options. We've got a research team that goes around the world and knocks on doors and gets to the bottom of things and reads laws about who got citizenship by doing what. I don't think almost anyone else does that. I think one lawyer right now, it costs $500,000 to work with it. I don't think anybody else is doing that and flying to countries in Latin America and reading like how people can be granted citizenship by living there, 21 days a year. They just want to sell you a passport. And maybe that's the best option. But wouldn't you want to know that you've evaluated all the options before you just buy something off the shelf? That's what Nomad Capitalist does. We've helped people get citizenship in dozens of countries, help people move to dozens of tax-friendly countries. The options that most people are talking about, move to Dubai for low tax, get a citizenship in St. Kitts. It's so off the shelf that most people are going to want something different, and you can achieve largely the same results and better by looking at dozens of different options, which most companies don't have. Multipolarity is here. You want to have a passport that is considered not so good. That's what we can help you do to build your options. And if you want to keep the Western passport, fine, but have alternatives.